What if I told you? The world's most powerful navy has already won the war, but still can't open a single waterway? Right now, in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz, a silent equation is playing out. Not about territory, not about politics, but about certainty. Because in modern warfare, white right pointing backhand index 90% success is failure. Globe showing Europe-Africa the sighting that changed everything. On March 14th, something unusual appeared on open-source satellite tracking feeds. Not a carrier, not a destroyer, but an amphibious assault ship, white right pointing backhand index USS Tripoli, LHA-7. A vessel many defense analysts had already dismissed as a mistake. But what made this sighting alarming wasn't just the ship. It was where it was going. White right pointing backhand index toward Hormuz. Ship. What makes this deployment strange? On paper, the war looks almost finished. The United States, under Donald Trump, has already dismantled most of Iran's conventional military power. Let's break that down. Dozens of Iranian warships destroyed, missile production infrastructure crippled, drone factories neutralized. Key naval capabilities degraded and surrounding the region. Carrier strike groups dominate from multiple directions. Long-range air power controls the sky's surveillance coverage is near total. From a traditional military perspective, white right pointing backhand index, this is what victory looks like. And yet, white right pointing backhand index, the Strait is still closed. Warning sign # the illusion of control. This is where most people misunderstand modern conflict. War is not just about destroying capability. It's about restoring confidence. Right now, more than 150 oil tankers are sitting idle outside Hormuz. Not because they physically can't pass, white right pointing backhand index, but because they're not willing to risk it. And that hesitation is costing millions every single day. Oil prices remain above $100 per barrel. Not because supply is gone, white right pointing backhand index, but because certainty is gone. 10% that controls everything. Here's the critical insight. Even after massive destruction, Iran still retains 10% of its capability. And that 10% includes naval mines scattered across seabeds, mobile missile launchers hidden in mountains, fast attack craft in coastal zones, asymmetric naval tactics designed for disruption. Individually, not enough to win a war. But collectively, white right pointing backhand index enough to stop the world economy. Bomb. The brutal arithmetic of modern war. Here's the equation every naval commander understands. White right pointing backhand index, you don't need to destroy a fleet. White right pointing backhand index, you don't need to win a battle. And that brings us to the real question. Why send a ship that analysts once called a failure? White right pointing backhand index to solve a problem 2 supercarriers couldn't? What can 2,500 Marines do? White right pointing backhand index that 50,000 sailors cannot? Because the answer isn't about more firepower. It's about changing the rules of the equation. What if the ship everyone laughed at is the only one that actually works? Because to understand why USS Tripoli is heading toward the Strait of Hormuz, you first need to understand why it was almost rejected. When the US Navy designed the *** America-class amphibious assault ships ***, they made a decision that shocked almost everyone in defense circles. They removed something that had defined amphibious warfare for decades. White right pointing backhand index, the well deck. Now, if you're not familiar, the well deck is the heart of a traditional amphibious ship. It's a massive, floodable chamber inside the hull that allows *landing craft *hovercraft amphibious vehicles to launch directly into the sea. It's how Marines have gone ashore since World War II. Remove that, and critics said you're no longer building an amphibious assault ship. White right pointing backhand index, you're building something confused, something incomplete. The backlash was immediate. Military analysts called it *a design flaw, *a strategic mistake, *a billion-dollar misunderstanding of warfare. Even inside government circles, pressure mounted. Congress eventually stepped in. They forced the Navy to bring the well deck back in later ships, which meant white right pointing backhand index. The first 2 ships, USS America and USS Tripoli, were labeled as failed experiments, ships that forgot how to be amphibious. But here's what most critics missed. When the Navy removed the well deck, they didn't just take something away. White right pointing backhand index, they created space. A lot of space. And they used it to build something completely different. Inside USS Tripoli, That extra space was transformed into *A**** much larger hangar bay **** expanded aircraft maintenance facilities. Increased aviation fuel storage advanced medical and surgical capabilities in simple terms. White right pointing backhand index Tripoli sacrificed sea-based assault. White right pointing backhand index to become an aviation powerhouse. And that decision changes everything. Because instead of focusing on landing craft, Tripoli focuses on aircraft. Specifically, white right pointing backhand index the F-35B Lightning II. Now this isn't just another fighter jet. The F-35B is a *** STOVL aircraft ***, short takeoff vertical landing that means it can launch from short decks land without long runways operate from ships that aren't traditional carriers. And USS Tripoli can carry up to white right pointing backhand index 20 F-35Bs. Let that sink in. That's nearly half the air power of a full-sized supercarrier on a ship that costs a fraction of the price. And this isn't theoretical. In April 2022, during operations off the California coast, USS Tripoli demonstrated exactly what it could do. White right pointing backhand index 20 F-35Bs operating simultaneously from its deck. That's not an amphibious ship anymore. White right pointing backhand index that's a *** Lightning carrier ***. A compact, mobile airbase at sea. So the ship that critics said had lost its purpose actually found a new one. Not weaker. White right pointing backhand index just different. What if the real problem in Hormuz isn't power, white right pointing backhand index but *** dimension ***? Because for decades, every military plan in the region has been built around just two layers. White right pointing backhand index see white right pointing backhand index air. And for most wars, that's enough. But not here. Not in the Strait of Hormuz. #waterwave***, two-dimensional war ***. So far, this conflict has been fought in two dimensions. From the sea, warships, carrier strike groups missile systems from the air, fighter jets bombers surveillance drones. And in those two dimensions, the United States has overwhelming dominance. From carriers like the USS Lincoln and USS Ford, aircraft control the skies. They strike missile factories naval bases drone infrastructure and at sea. Iran's navy has taken heavy losses. On paper, white right pointing backhand index the battlefield looks controlled. But reality says otherwise. #warning sign #** the gap no one can close ***. Because dominance in air and sea does not equal control. There is still a gap. A dangerous one. And that gap exists in a place most people don't think about. White right pointing backhand index the ground. Inside and around the strait, Iran still controls small islands, coastal launch sites hidden missile positions reinforced underground tunnels. These are not easy targets. They are hardened concealed, designed to survive airstrikes so even after massive bombardment. White right pointing backhand index they are still active. #bullseye. WHY air power isn't enough here's the limitation of air power. Aircraft can destroy targets. But they cannot stay Every mission follows the same pattern. Takeoff strike return which creates white right pointing backhand index time gaps. And those gaps allow mobile launchers to reposition drones to relaunch. Fast boats to regroup so even if 90% is destroyed. White right pointing backhand index the remaining 10% keeps operating. #** the missing dimension ***. This is where the concept changes. To truly control Hormuz, you don't just need to destroy threats. White right pointing backhand index you need to *** occupy the space they operate from ***. And that requires a third dimension. White right pointing backhand index ground presence. Not large-scale invasion. Not occupation. But something more precise. Police cars revolving light *** enter the Marines ***. This is where USS Tripoli changes the equation again. Because it doesn't just bring aircraft. White right pointing backhand index it brings Marines. 2,500 highly trained forces capable of rapid deployment, short-term operations, high-risk missions, and more importantly, white right pointing backhand index, they don't need ports. White right pointing backhand index, they don't need runways. They arrive from the air. Desert island ***, the island problem ***, inside the Strait are key strategic islands controlled by Iran. These islands act like white right pointing backhand index unsinkable military bases. They host radar systems, missile launchers, surveillance equipment. And here's the problem. White right pointing backhand index, you cannot sink an island. White right pointing backhand index, you cannot fully neutralize it from distance. As long as those positions exist. White right pointing backhand index, every ship pass in.